Finn was not the kind of man who looked for trouble. He was not the kind of man who looked for praise either. He kept to himself, worked with his hands, and asked for nothing from anyone. That was how he had always lived, and that was how he intended to keep living, quietly, in the back corner of Outpost Varric 9, where the noise of the galaxy rarely reached him. Varric 9 was not a beautiful place. It sat at the edge of 3 trade routes, which meant it was always busy, always loud, and always a little dangerous. Ships came and went at all hours. Merchants argued over prices in 6 different languages. The air smelled of fuel, street food, and rust. The floors of the marketplace were old and cracked, and the lights above flickered more often than they worked. Finn had a small workshop at the far end of the lower market. It was barely bigger than a storage room. The walls were covered in tools, wires, and half-finished projects. There was a single window that looked out onto the marketplace floor, and Finn spent a lot of time sitting beside it, drinking his morning tea and watching the world go by. That was how he first saw Saya. She was small for her age, maybe 8 or 9 years old by human count. The Velhari were a tall species, graceful and silver-skinned, with wide dark eyes that caught the light like still water. But Saya's eyes were different. They were pale and clouded, unfocused, always pointed just slightly in the wrong direction. She had been blind since birth. Finn could see that immediately. What struck him was not her blindness. What struck him was how alone she was. She moved through the marketplace carefully, one hand stretched out in front of her, the other holding the strap of a small bag on her shoulder. She counted her steps. She listened for the sound of the crowd and adjusted her path around it. She was slow, but she was not lost. She had clearly walked this route many times before. But the people around her did not make it easy. Merchants moved their carts without warning. Other shoppers walked fast and never looked down. Twice, Finn watched someone nearly knock her over without even stopping to check if she was all right. Nobody offered to help. Nobody even seemed to notice her. Saya did not cry. She did not ask for help. She simply stopped, found her balance, and kept going. Finn set down his tea. He watched her for a long time that morning. He told himself it was none of his business. He had work to do. He had parts to sort and a cooling unit to repair for a merchant on the upper level. He did not have time to sit by the window and feel things about strangers. But he kept watching. Over the next few days, he noticed that Saya came to the market every morning. She always followed the same path. She always carried the same small bag, which Finn eventually realized contained small handmade items that her mother sold from a tiny stall near the eastern wall. Lena, her mother, could not always be there. She had other work, other responsibilities. So Saya came alone, delivered the goods, and made her way back. Every morning. Alone. Through a market that did not care whether she made it or not. On the 4th day, Finn stopped watching and started thinking. He had been an engineer for most of his adult life. He had worked on ships, on stations, on systems that most people never saw and never thought about. He understood how things worked, how signals moved, how sensors read the world, how information could be translated from one form into another. He had spent years solving problems that other people said could not be solved. He began to wonder if he could solve this one. The idea started simply. A basic sonar device, something small enough to wear, that could detect objects in front of a user and send a signal. But simple was not good enough. A series of beeps would not tell Saya where exactly something was, how big it was, or how fast it was moving. She needed something better. She needed something that could give her a real picture of the world around her. Finn started drawing diagrams that night. He worked in the early mornings before the market opened and late at night after it closed. He pulled parts from old sensor arrays, navigation modules, and broken equipment that other engineers had thrown away. He had very little money, so he made do with what he could find. He tested ideas, threw them out, and tried again. He filled 3 notebooks with calculations and crossed out drawings. It took him 4 weeks. What he built did not look like much from the outside. It looked like a pair of goggles held together with thin metal bands and a small processor unit no bigger than a coin. There were soft pads on the inside that rested gently against the skin around the eyes and temples. The device read the environment through a combination of sonar pulses and a small wide-angle sensor, then converted that data into soft electrical signals that fed directly into the neural pathways connected to the brain's spatial processing center. It did not give sight exactly, but it gave something very close. Finn had no way to test it on himself. His brain was not wired the same way. He spent 1 more week adjusting, rechecking, and second-guessing himself. Then, on a quiet morning when the lower market was still half empty, he walked out of his workshop for the first time in days and waited near the eastern entrance. Saya arrived at her usual time. Finn approached her slowly and spoke in a calm, low voice so he would not startle her. He introduced himself. He told her he had made something he wanted her to try, and that she did not have to if she did not want to. He told her exactly what it was and what it would do, in the simplest words he could find. Saya was quiet for a moment. Then she nodded. He fitted the device onto her head carefully, adjusted the band so it sat comfortably, and switched it on. Nothing happened for about 3 seconds. Then Saya went completely still. Her hands, which had been relaxed at her sides, slowly rose and stopped in front of her face. She turned them over. She looked at them, really looked at them, in whatever way the device was allowing her to see. Her lips parted. Her breath came out in a slow, shaking exhale. She turned her head and looked at Finn. He did not know what she was seeing exactly. He did not know how the signals translated inside her mind, what shapes or shadows the world became for her in that moment. But whatever it was, it made her eyes fill with tears that ran quietly down her silver cheeks. She did not say anything for a long time. Around them, a few people in the market had stopped walking. They were watching. Some were nudging each other. The crowd grew slowly, drawn by something they could not quite name, the sight of a small blind girl standing completely still in the middle of a busy marketplace, seeing the world for the very first time. Finn stood in front of her and waited. Saya looked up at him and said, very softly, "Is that the sky?" She was pointing at the flickering light panel above them on the ceiling of the outpost. Finn looked up at it, then back at her. He smiled. "Close enough," he said quietly. Lena heard about it before she even reached the market. She had been on her way from the upper level, carrying a crate of small woven goods that she sold from her stall near the eastern wall. She was tired. She was always tired. Life on Varric 9 was not easy for a single Velhari mother with no connections, no savings, and no one to call on when things went wrong. She kept her head down, worked hard, and asked for nothing from anyone. Then a neighbor stopped her on the walkway and told her what had happened. Lena set the crate down on the floor right there in the middle of the corridor and listened. The neighbor spoke quickly, excitedly, the way people spoke when they had seen something they could not quite explain. She described the human engineer, the strange device, the moment Saya had gone still in the middle of the market. She described the crowd that had gathered. She described the tears on Saya's face. Lena did not say anything. She picked up her crate and walked faster. She found Saya sitting outside the small stall, the device still on her head, turning it slowly from side to side as she looked at everything around her. She was looking at the wall, at the pattern of the old tiles, at the people walking past. She was looking at her own hands again, opening and closing her fingers in front of her face with an expression of quiet wonder that Lena had never seen on her daughter before. Lena knelt in front of her and touched her face gently. Saya looked at her. Really looked at her. And then she said, very softly, "You are silver. I always thought you would be silver." Lena held her daughter tightly and did not let go for a long time. Later, when Saya had settled and was resting behind the stall with the device carefully placed beside her, Lena went to find the human. It was not difficult. Everyone in the lower market seemed to know where his workshop was now. Several people pointed her in the right direction without her even having to ask. Finn was at his workbench when she arrived, sorting through a small pile of components with the focused expression of someone who had already moved on to the next problem. He looked up when she knocked on the open door frame. He was younger than she had expected. Quiet-looking. Ordinary, in the way that people who did extraordinary things sometimes were. Lena thanked him. She thanked him carefully and completely, the way Velhari custom required, with both hands pressed together and her head bowed. Then she straightened and looked at him directly. She asked him where he had gotten the technology. Finn leaned back in his chair and gave her an easy, relaxed answer. He told her he had built it himself from salvaged parts. Old sensor arrays, a broken navigation module, a neural signal adapter from a medical scanner that someone had thrown in the scrap heap 3 months ago. He told her the underlying science was not secret. It was all published research, available to anyone who knew where to look and had the patience to read through it. Lena listened carefully. Then she told him, in a polite but serious voice, that what he had just described was not possible. Finn smiled slightly and said that it was, because he had just done it. Lena did not smile back. She sat down on the old stool near his door and folded her hands in her lap and explained something to him that she clearly felt he needed to understand. Neural interface technology of the kind he had described was strictly controlled under Galactic Directorate Code. Only licensed corporations with approved research charters were permitted to develop or distribute it. The licensing process alone took years and cost more credits than most people saw in a lifetime. What Finn had built, from scrap, in 4 weeks, in a storage room on a backwater trading post, was the kind of thing that made powerful people ask uncomfortable questions. Finn was quiet for a moment. Then he said that Saya needed to be able to see, and that he had not seen anyone else stepping forward to help with that. Lena looked at him for a long time. Her expression was complicated. There was gratitude in it, deep and genuine. But there was also fear, and she was not trying to hide the fear. She told him she was not criticizing what he had done. She was warning him about what came next. Then she picked up her bag, thanked him again, and left. Finn sat alone in his workshop for a while after she was gone. He picked up a small component from his workbench and turned it over in his fingers. He thought about what she had said. He thought about the licensing codes and the corporate charters and the long list of rules that existed in the galaxy around technology and who was allowed to build what and for whom. Then he set the component down, picked up his tools, and went back to work. He was not worried. He probably should have been. On the other side of the lower market, in a narrow office above a currency exchange booth, a man named Doyle was finishing a report. Doyle was not a merchant. He was not an engineer or a trader or anything else that the people of Varric 9 would have considered useful. He was an information broker. He collected facts the way other people collected debts, carefully, patiently, and always with an eye on what they might eventually be worth. He had been watching Finn for several weeks before the incident with the girl. He had noticed the late nights in the workshop, the unusual combination of parts Finn had been sourcing from the scrap dealers, the quiet and deliberate way the human worked when he thought no one was paying attention. Doyle had made a note of it. He made notes about everything. The morning in the marketplace had confirmed what he already suspected. The device on the girl's head was not a toy. It was not a simple aid built from common parts. Doyle had spoken to 2 people who had been standing close enough to get a good look at it, and both of them had described details that made him sit very still at his desk for a long time afterward. He wrote his report in plain, simple language. He did not exaggerate. He did not need to. The facts were interesting enough on their own. He described the device. He described what it appeared to do. He described the engineer. Human, male, working alone, no visible corporate affiliation, no registered technology license on file. He estimated the level of skill required to produce what he had seen and wrote that estimate down to, with a small note beside it that read, significantly above standard. He sent the report through 3 separate relays to keep it clean and untraceable. He did not address it to anyone specific. He simply sent it to a standing account that he had used before, one that belonged to people who paid well and asked few questions in return. Then he closed his screen, leaned back in his chair, and listened to the noise of the marketplace below his window. Somewhere down there, a small blind girl was seeing the world for the first time. Somewhere down there, a quiet human engineer was sitting in his workshop, not worrying about anything. Doyle allowed himself a small, unhurried smile. He had done his part. Now it was simply a matter of waiting to see what happened next. The ship came in without warning. That was the first thing people noticed. Every ship that docked at Varrock 9 was supposed to file an arrival notice at least 20 minutes before landing. It was a basic rule, one that even the smallest cargo haulers followed without complaint. But this ship filed nothing. It simply appeared on the lower dock scanners without any prior signal, descended through the docking shaft with calm precision, and touched down in Bay 4 with a sound like a quiet exhale. It was black. Not dark gray, not deep blue. Black, the kind that seemed to pull light toward it rather than reflect it. There were no markings on the hull except for a single small insignia near the forward hatch. Anyone on Varrock 9 who recognized that insignia went still when they saw it. It was the seal of the Galactic Enforcement Directorate. 3 soldiers stepped out. They were tall, broad-shouldered, and completely covered in black armor that fit them like a second skin. Their helmets were sealed and dark. They carried no visible weapons in their hands, but everyone who watched them walk through the docking bay understood clearly that weapons were not far away. They moved in a tight formation, unhurried and perfectly even, the way people moved when they had done something many times before and felt no need to rush. The docking bay went quiet as they passed through it. Word moved through Varrock 9 the way word always moved through small and crowded places, fast, and slightly ahead of the truth. By the time the soldiers reached the main corridor of the lower market, half the post already knew they were there. Merchants lowered their voices. Shoppers found reasons to step back against the walls. The usual noise of the marketplace dropped to a low, uneasy murmur. The soldiers did not stop to speak to anyone. They did not ask for directions. They had clearly been given everything they needed before they arrived. They walked straight through the main corridor of the lower market, turned at the junction near the fuel exchange, and headed toward the far end of the outpost. Toward Finn's workshop. Saya was at her mother's stall when she felt the change in the crowd. She could not have explained exactly how she felt it. The vision gear gave her a sense of shapes and spaces and movement, but it did not give her words for things yet. She was still learning what everything looked like, still connecting what she saw through the device to what she had always understood through sound and touch. But she had spent her whole life reading crowds through sound and feeling, and something in the sound of the market had shifted. It had gotten quieter. Too quickly. She stood up from her stool and looked toward the main corridor. Through the shapes and signals the device fed her, she could see a gap opening in the crowd, people stepping back, clearing a path without being asked. And moving through that path, 3 large dark figures, walking steadily and without stopping. Lena appeared beside her immediately and put a hand on her shoulder. She said nothing. Her silence told Saya everything. Saya watched the 3 figures move through the market. She did not fully understand who they were or what their armor meant. But she understood the way the crowd reacted to them, and she understood the direction they were walking. She had walked that direction herself many times in the past weeks. She knew exactly where that path led. She reached up and touched the vision gear on her head without thinking. Finn heard them coming before he saw them. Not because they were loud. They were not loud at all. But his workshop window looked out onto the marketplace floor, and he had spent enough time sitting beside it to know what the market sounded like at any given hour. He knew its rhythms. He knew when it was busy and when it was slow, when a deal had gone wrong and when someone had dropped something heavy 3 stalls over. He knew what it sounded like when something had frightened it into silence. He set down the small transmitter coil he had been rewinding and looked out the window. He saw the crowd parted. He saw the black armor. He sat with that for a moment, quietly, the way he sat with most things. Then he turned back to his workbench, picked up the transmitter coil again, and continued rewinding it. His hands were steady. His breathing was even. He did not get up. He did not go to the door. He did not look out the window again. He simply worked, and waited. The knock on his door frame came about 2 minutes later. One of the soldiers stood in the doorway. The other 2 were positioned just behind, one on each side. The soldier in front was slightly taller than the others, and the insignia on the left side of the chest plate was different, a small additional mark that indicated rank. The voice that came from behind the sealed helmet was flat and clear and carried no particular emotion. Finn. Human engineer, unregistered. You are identified under Directorate Warrant 7 Tau 9 as being in violation of Galactic Technology Restriction Codes, Articles 4, 7, 12, and associated subsections. 14 counts in total. You are required to come with us for formal processing. Finn finished the loop he was winding. He set the coil down carefully on the workbench beside his tools. He pushed back his chair and stood up. He looked at the soldier in the doorway for a moment without speaking. Then he looked past the soldier at the 2 behind. Then he looked out his window at the marketplace, where a crowd had gathered at a careful distance, watching in silence. He found Saya in the crowd without much difficulty. She was standing near the eastern wall beside her mother, small and still, the vision gear on her head. She was looking directly at the workshop. Looking directly at him, in whatever way the device allowed her to see. Finn looked at her for just a second. Then he looked back at the soldier. 14 counts, he said quietly. His voice was calm. Almost conversational. That's quite a list for a pair of goggles made from scrap. The soldier said nothing. Finn reached down and picked up a small worn cloth from the workbench. He wiped his hands on it slowly, folded it, and set it down. He looked around his workshop once. At the tools on the walls, the notebook stacked on the shelf, the half-finished projects on every surface. He looked at all of it the way a person looks at something familiar before leaving it for an uncertain amount of time. Then he walked to the door. He did not argue. He did not raise his hands or make himself small. He walked to the door with the same quiet, unhurried manner he did everything else. He stopped just inside the doorway and looked at the lead soldier. "I'll come," he said simply. "I've got nothing to hide." The soldier stepped back to let him through. Finn walked out of his workshop and into the corridor, and the 3 black-armored figures fell into position around him. The crowd in the market watched in complete silence as they walked back the way they had come. Finn did not look at the crowd. But just before he turned the corner at the junction near the fuel exchange, he glanced once more toward the eastern wall. Saya was still watching him. One small silver hand was raised, pressed flat against the air in front of her, the way she had first touched her own face the morning the world became visible to her. Finn gave a single small nod. Then he turned the corner and was gone. The interrogation room on the directorate ship was very clean. That was the first thing Finn noticed. Everything on Varric 9 was old and worn and slightly broken in some way. The walls were scuffed, the floors were cracked, and nothing was ever quite the right temperature. But this room was different. The walls were smooth and white. The table in the center was a single piece of dark metal with no joints or seams. The chairs were straight and cold. The light above came from everywhere and nowhere at the same time, filling the room without casting a single shadow. It was the kind of clean that was meant to make a person feel small. Finn sat down in the chair across from the empty side of the table and looked around the room without any particular expression. He was not uncomfortable, exactly. He was simply paying attention, the way he always paid attention to new environments. He noted the ventilation panel in the upper left corner. He noted the faint hum of the ship's secondary power system beneath the floor. He noted that the table was bolted down but the chairs were not. He folded his hands on the table and waited. Commander Ada came in alone. She was not what Finn had expected, though he realized afterward that he had not formed a strong expectation either way. She was human, which surprised him slightly. She was not tall, not especially broad, and she wore her rank without decoration, just the single stripe on her collar and the directorate seal on her left shoulder. Her face was calm and unreadable in the practiced way of someone who had learned long ago not to lead with expression. She carried a thin data panel in one hand. She set it on the table and sat down across from Finn without introducing herself immediately. She looked at him the way someone looks at a document they have already read but want to read again more carefully. Then she said, "Tell me how you built it. Not who are you. Not do you understand the charges. Not are you aware of what you have done. Just, tell me how you built it." Finn looked at her for a moment. Then he told her. He started at the beginning, the way he always explained things, plainly, in order, without skipping steps. He described the sonar array he had pulled from a broken proximity sensor. He described the wide-angle optical reader he had adapted from a cargo scanner. He described the neural signal adapter from the medical scanner in the scrap heap, and the weeks he had spent recalibrating it to work with Velhari neural pathways instead of the human ones it had originally been designed for. He described the mapping process, how he had studied published research on Velhari sensory biology and cross-referenced it with 3 separate open-access papers on neural signal translation that had been sitting in galactic academic archives for years, largely unread. He described how he had written the translation algorithm himself, by hand, in the margins of a notebook, over the course of 2 late nights when the market below his window was finally quiet. He talked for about 12 minutes without stopping. Commander Ada did not interrupt him once. She did not write anything down. She did not look at her data panel. She just listened, and her expression, which had started as carefully neutral, shifted slowly into something that was harder to name. When Finn finished, the room was quiet for a long moment. Ada looked down at the data panel in front of her. She turned it so Finn could see the screen. On it was a technical schematic. Clean, precise, drawn by someone with access to proper drafting software. It was a diagram of a neural interface device. Finn looked at it without touching the panel. "This is the leading design from our own research division," Ada said. 11 years of development. 43 researchers. A budget that I am not permitted to state out loud in an unofficial setting. She paused. "It does not work as well as what you built in 4 weeks from garbage." Finn looked at the schematic for another moment. Then he looked back at her. He did not say anything. Ada leaned back slightly in her chair. The carefully neutral expression had settled into something closer to honest. She said, "The 14 charges in the warrant are real. I am not going to pretend they are not. Technically, what you built falls within the boundaries of restricted development code." She paused again. But the code was written to prevent corporations from stealing each other's research. It was not written for this. For what? Finn asked. For a person who solved the problem by himself, she said, because a child needed to see. The room was quiet again. The hum of the ship's power system moved steadily beneath the floor. Ada picked up the data panel and looked at it for a moment. Then she set it back down and looked at Finn directly. "I want to be straightforward with you," she said. "The Directorate has a research division. That division has been working on neural interface technology for accessible medical use for over a decade. They have made progress. But what you described to me just now, the translation algorithm, the cross-species calibration method, the way you resolved the signal degradation problem that has been stopping our team for 3 years, that is not progress. That is a solution. Finn was quiet. We would like you to work with us, Ada said. Formally. With full authorization, proper resources, and legal protection for everything you develop going forward. No more warrant. No more 14 counts. A clean record and a contract. She said it simply and without pressure, the way someone states a fact rather than makes an offer. She was watching him carefully as she said it. Finn did not answer immediately. He looked at the table for a moment. He thought about his workshop, the notebooks on the shelf, the tools on the walls, the half-finished projects on every surface. He thought about the quiet of Varric 9 in the early morning before the market opened. Then he looked up at Ada. I have one question, he said. Ada waited. Saya, he said. The girl. Does she keep the headset? Ada looked at him. Something moved briefly behind her eyes, not surprise exactly, but something close to it. As if she had prepared for many possible first questions and this had not been among them. She did not answer immediately. She looked down at the data panel, then back at Finn. The headset is technically evidence under the current warrant, she said carefully. I know what it is technically, Finn said. His voice was still calm. Still quiet. But there was something underneath it that had not been there before. Not anger. Something more settled than anger. I am asking what happens to it. Ada held his gaze for a long moment. Then she reached forward and turned the data panel face down on the table, in the small deliberate way of someone setting something aside. The girl keeps the headset, she said. Finn nodded once. A small, simple nod. Then he leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment, and when he looked back at Ada his expression was the same calm, unhurried expression it had been since the soldiers had appeared in his doorway. All right, he said quietly. Tell me about the contract. The contract was 4 pages long. Finn read every word of it. He read it the way he read technical manuals, slowly, carefully, without skipping anything. Ada sat across the table and waited without rushing him. She had ordered 2 cups of something hot from the ship's small provisions unit, and one of them sat near Finn's elbow, going slowly cool while he read. He reached the end of the 4th page. He set it down. He picked up the cup and took a sip and looked at the wall for a moment. Then he said, I have a condition. Ada said, I expected you might. Finn set the cup down and looked at her directly. He spoke clearly and without decoration, the way he always spoke. He told her that he would sign the contract, work with the Directorate's research division, share everything he knew about the neural interface design, and help develop it into something that could be properly manufactured and distributed across the galaxy. He would do all of that willingly and without complaint. But before any military application was considered, before the Directorate used the technology for any purpose related to soldiers or weapons or tactical advantage of any kind, the base design had to be open licensed. Fully and completely. Available to any researcher, any medical facility, any individual or organization anywhere in the galaxy, at no cost and with no restrictions. Every blind child, of every species, on every world, had to have access to it first. He said it plainly and finished without emphasis. He did not raise his voice. He did not lean forward. He simply stated it as a fact, the way he stated most things, and then he waited. Ada was quiet for a moment. She looked at the contract on the table between them. Then she looked at Finn. The Directorate's primary interest is research development, she said carefully. Military application is one possible direction among several. It is not the only one. I know, Finn said. I am not saying it can never happen. I am saying it cannot happen first. The open license comes first. That is the condition. Ada looked at him for a long moment. Finn did not look away and did not add anything further. He had said what he meant and he saw no reason to say it again in different words. Ada reached across the table and pulled the contract toward her. She looked at the last page for a moment. Then she picked up the writing tool beside the panel and added 4 lines at the bottom of the final page, in plain clear text. She wrote the condition exactly as Finn had stated it. She did not soften it or reword it or make it smaller than it was. Then she signed below it and slid the contract back across the table. Finn read the 4 added lines. He read them twice. Then he picked up the writing tool and signed his name at the bottom of the page in his small, neat handwriting. Ada took the contract back, pressed her thumb to the verification panel on the data screen, and the document sealed with a quiet sound. "Welcome to the Directorate," she said. Finn picked up his cup and finished the last of it. "Thank you," he said. "When do we leave?" The Directorate ship was scheduled to depart within the hour. Word had spread through Varric 9 the way it always did, fast and slightly uneven, carried from person to person across the market stalls and corridor junctions and upper walkways of the outpost. People knew that the soldiers were leaving. People knew that the human engineer from the lower market workshop was going with them. Most people did not know the details beyond that, and the details that were being passed around were not entirely accurate. But everyone knew he was leaving. Finn walked back through the lower market with Ada beside him and the 2 soldiers a few paces behind. He had nothing to carry. Everything in his workshop he had left exactly as it was, the tools on the walls, the notebooks on the shelf, the half-finished projects on every surface. He had stood in the doorway for a moment before leaving and looked at all of it one last time. Then he had turned and walked away without going back for anything. The market was quieter than usual as they passed through it. People watched from the sides of the corridor. Some nodded at him. A few of the merchants he had done small repair work for over the months raised a hand as he passed. Finn nodded back at each of them. He was nearly at the junction near the fuel exchange when he heard the sound. It was small at first. A quick, light sound, the sound of someone moving fast through a crowd. The shuffle of people stepping aside, the murmur of voices reacting to something pushing past them. Finn slowed without fully stopping. He turned his head slightly. Then Saya came through the crowd. She was moving faster than he had ever seen her move. She was not feeling her way forward with a careful outstretched hand the way she used to. She was running, weaving around people with her head up and the vision gear steady on her face, reading the space in front of her with the confidence of someone who trusted what she saw. Her small silver feet hit the floor in quick, certain steps. She came to a stop directly in front of Finn. They looked at each other. Finn stood still. Saya was breathing hard from running. Her pale clouded eyes were aimed just slightly to the side of his face the way they always were, but behind the vision gear the device was doing what it had been built to do. She was looking at him. Really looking at him, in the way she looked at things now, steady and focused and full of quiet attention. Finn knelt down so he was at her level. Up close, he could see that she had been crying recently. Her cheeks were dry now but her expression carried the particular stillness that comes after strong feeling has passed through and left a person quieter than before. She looked at his face for a long moment without speaking. She looked at his eyes, his hands, the collar of his jacket. She looked at him the way she had looked at her own hands that first morning. Carefully, as if she was memorizing something she did not want to forget. Then she said, "I wanted to see your face before you went." Finn did not say anything for a moment. He looked at her small serious face and the vision gear sitting steady on her head and the way she held herself, straight and still and certain, so different from the careful uncertain girl he had first watched crossing the market alone weeks ago. "How do I look?" he asked quietly. Saya considered this with the gravity that children bring to important questions. "Kind," she said. "You look kind." Finn smiled. It was a small smile, the kind that reached his eyes without making a lot of noise about it. He reached out and very gently checked the fit of the vision gear on her head, adjusting the band slightly on the left side the way he had done the first morning. Old habit. The gear was fine. It had always been fine. He just needed something to do with his hands for a moment. Then he looked at her directly and spoke in a calm, quiet voice. "Keep looking at the stars," he said. "Every chance you get. Day or night, whenever you can find them. Keep looking." Saya looked at him steadily. "Are they beautiful?" she asked. "Yes," he said simply. "They are." She was quiet for a moment. Then she straightened slightly, the way she did when she had made a decision about something. "I promise," she said. Finn held her gaze for one more moment. Then he stood up slowly and turned back toward the docking corridor. Ada was waiting a few paces back, and the two soldiers behind her. None of them had spoken or moved during any of it. Finn walked to where Ada stood and gave a single small nod that he was ready. They walked toward the docking bay together. Finn did not look back. He had said what needed to be said and he was not a man who undid things by looking back at them. But just before the corridor curved and the market disappeared from view, he heard Saya's voice one last time behind him, small and clear and certain, carrying easily through the quiet outpost air. "I promise," she said again. To no one in particular. To everyone. To herself. Finn kept walking. And for just a moment, in the quiet curve of the corridor with the hum of the ship ahead of him and the sound of her voice still in the air behind him, he allowed himself to smile again. It was enough. It was more than enough.